on stage, who apparently is speaking with an Austrian live interpretation dialect and doing a great job from what I can see up here from the booth. All right, let's get started with this talk by Veit, who is introducing provocative questions into the universitarian field. And today he's going to do his talk on, is democracy still salvageable? So a big round of applause for Veit.
Ja, guten Abend. Ich freue mich, hier zu sein.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be here.
Wurde ja gesagt, die Hoffnung ist,
as it was said, hope is the answer whether democracy is still to be saved or not. I'm just going to start with the introduction. Why do we ask the question if democracy is still to be saved or not? So what are the reasons? So it's really interesting. There is a openly discourse about
der gesagt hat, Krisen gehören mittlerweile zum Normalzustand. Wir müssen über den
So where basically he's leading and instigating towards the public discourse of how democracy is being threatened, then in political studies, we have this diagnostics that we're sort of in this mode of crisis, and they're constantly publishing warning signals. They're constantly talking about how the subject matter itself is in this mode of crisis, and that feels like a rather important warning signal. And that, yes.
Then secondly, it's the future, the hope for the future is quite like, it's not very clear. So people that say that it would just be worse, it's sort of like, I would say, a progressive situation. So people that, the progressive idea is that people living in places that have better conditions are able to have hope. So people say that democracy could also sort the climate problem we're living right now. So in Germany, we've got the question about the AfD, this wave of the extremist right politics that started with Donald Trump being on power. So the right populists would also say that the democracy is going through a crisis. So that's one of the reasons why they are getting stronger and stronger. And another reason is that the number of the democracy is like going through a reverse wave. So it means it's going down. So if you think about the question of how people are happy with democracy or not, so you'd say that people in Germany are about 50% people happy with democracy. This was the introduction, and how am I going to go through this theme?
So we're kind of going to look at behind, what's actually behind all of these symptoms that are appearing around us. Secondly, what are the consequences of what's happening to democracy? And thirdly, what can be done? So what's behind all of this? There's three favorite theses. First one, the regression thesis within the sciences, says that we sort of have a fallback into older authoritarianism, and that just sort of comes back. So we're going back to Weimar Republic, and to me this isn't very convincing. History is not repeating itself. It's anachronistic to believe and think like this. Second thesis that's quite popular, I would like to call the bad guy thesis. It basically says that the right populists, it's their fault that the backlash is happening. I think there is something to this, but if you're looking at that as an isolated and only a sole reason, it's much too simple, and it's almost a conspiracy theory that only one actor within the societal system is responsible for an overall crisis. Thirdly, there is the economy stupid thesis. It's sheer and only the neoliberalism who's ruining democracy. That sells really well, that like public infrastructure is being sold, and that sells really well, honestly, especially within the progressive field of the society, but also I think this is a grand simplification. So another interpretation, my interpretation, is that we have reached the end of democracy, or rather the twilight of democracy. So what's the fundamental idea about this? It's not regression, it's actually progress. So we're not having a fallback moment, but we actually have a move forward where democracy is eroded. So the socio-political development is undermining democracy. So it's a de-evolution of democracy. There's obviously a lot of other people who have built on this, Inga von Blühdorn, Huntington, Solo. All of this is based against the old theory of modernization that's being written down by Parsons and Berger, where they say all good things go together. It's like the modern society is a really good whole package, free market, individualistic culture, expressive art, democracy. All of these are supporting each other, and they all kind of belong together, and this is all a package, and our idea is countering this. We feel like democracy might be leaving this package of modernity. So maybe democracy is an anachronism of democracy.
So why is that so? First of all, we've got like a general politicization of society through various factors. So you can talk about the participative revolution. There are lots of positive aspects. I would say now we've got to a point where everything is politicized. So even the political process included. So legitimation through
werden die Ergebnisse akzeptiert.
Procedural legitimacy.
Idee, ne? Also das Verfahren sorgt dafür, dass man das Ergebnis
So
akzeptiert.
the process makes sure that
in den USA. Das zweite ist, dass
the second is that this kind of politicization,
plakativ gesagt, alles ist politisch geworden, aber weniges wird gut
basically when people say everything is political,
auch eine Entwicklung, denke ich.
this is what is happening.
Habe ich schon mal zitiert, hat was Interessantes dazu geschrieben, nennt das Emanzipation zweiter Ordnung. Also ein Befreiungsprozess, wo wir
about the freedom process where we
Pflichten emanzipieren, die sozusagen in der alten Moderne noch mit an Bord waren. Ne? Also eine vernünftige Selbstbindung, ne? Dass ich etwa demokratische Beschlüsse akzeptiere.
So it's about accepting democratic processes.
Also so ein radikaler Libertarismus.
So like a radical liberalism.
Drittens,
Third,
das ist, denke ich, etwas, was so die
that I think is like the older modern theory really accept. So an older formulation or working division, they differentiate themselves even more. So that also applies to politics. So politics are also differentiated. They go to different networks, they go to different layers. So there are loads of different political fields, political layers. So politics is taking care of more and more themes and complex themes. So it goes more and more complex. Perhaps it's too complex nowadays. So there's also like the idiot experts. So that are experts in certain things, but so it's about the political knowledge is not. It's not split 50-50. So this empirical literature is quite difficult.
So it's quite shocking, actually, what this empirical data says. So we also maybe have gotten to the point where the political life is too differentiated, sort of like a ratchet effect, where it's so differentiated that it's very hard to imagine to democratically take back control within the British system. So fourth, we're kind of reaching the end of the compromise formula of democratic capitalism. It's an expression that should express this form of capitalism that is per se undemocratic, but it's been introduced in a democratic regiment, and where we have redistribution, we sort of have this compromise. So we have democracy, while at the same time we have capitalism that has a built-in exploitation system and mechanism. So we sort of have signs that this is sort of coming to an end. We have a growth of private political power, so almost an oligarchy. We also have a lust of what Rorty referred to as social hope. So the idea that there is a collective bettering of everyone of social status in the world, that seems to be eroded, and politics sort of seem as a zero checksum game where some people win whilst others obviously have to lose. So what are the consequences of this, obviously, of this process? I believe that as a central point, we have the problem of legitimization. So political studies have a term for this, the process that leads that people who are being governed accept the government as legitimate. So there's a reason for me to be governed by this body, is because I have something that I gain off of this. So this we even have in democracy, because it still is we have a body that's ruling and governing, and that ruling body is becoming, this legitimization of this ruling body is becoming more and more difficult, and there's a tendency that democratic systems are being put into question and are being felt as impositions almost. And we can sort of differentiate two different levels and two different aspects, the side of the input, so there's things that go into the political process that we can add from the society to the political process, and that's being perceived as disrupted. A central term for that would be hypocrisy, obviously, that summarizes this idea that the reality does not match up to the ideal. But we've reached the point where the ideal itself isn't really a sufficient idea anymore. And then all of a sudden we have these terms called facade democracy. So they kind of give this appearance that we live in a democratic world. And then on the other side we have the output world. So what's the output of the political system? So and that, I believe, where we have a clear lack of problem resolution. So there's a Forsa questionnaire from 2023. About a third of people that were asked said that they were of the opinion that the federal state was capable to solve public problems. That's a third of the entire society. And then there's obviously the problem of justifiability, that there is two public theories, not so like universitarian theories, but more within the societal discourse, that it doesn't really work anymore. I'm following an essay by Klaus Offert from 2013. So there's the social democratic idea of capitalism, where we do redistribution and we have regulation based off the state, we all gain. But then there's a neoliberal theory. Capitalism says that capitalism is great. If democracy just stays out of it, then it works even better. And let the markets do their own work and regulate themselves. And those are the two pillars of our democracy. And I would state that neither one of these actually works. But as an ideology, they sort of worked, but they don't appear to do that anymore. They don't appear to be working any longer. And then, obviously, something that I find quite concerning, but also at the same time quite astonishing, is if we can empirically prove that there is a central popular idea of democracy. So there's an idea within the society that it seems anachronistic to what I described at the beginning. So Bartels and Aachen call this the folk theory. It basically states that democracy is equal to good governance when it comes to public affairs, plus the will of the people is the driver of this. So input and output side match. So the people have one will, and this is not a scholarly or research theory. This is just kind of a folk popular theory that people need to believe in order to. And I feel like this is something that's becoming anachronistic.
So there are more theories, other theories, also in the science. They are also not plausible, I would say. Some of my colleagues don't see it that way. So one of the most important is the deliberative theory. Says democracy is a discourse that everybody can talk about it, everybody can bring it to the discussion. So that's the way that people can solve problems. It's very brutal, but so there are quite not as many points to start pointing for those discussions. So it's also through propaganda and fights and negative points. There's also the radical democracy theory, which says that democracy is not the folks or the people's
alles kann
question.
politisiert werden. Das ist in den anderen Regimen nicht so, ne? In Demokratien geht
So in democracy, you can actually fight about everything or discuss about everything, which you can't in other systems. So that's quite radical to talk about it, but
Aber so what?
I would say, yeah,
Also daran
could be, but
mangelt es
then
ja,
so what?
Gerade gar nicht so, ne? Sondern es mangelt an anderen Dingen, wie ich eingangs
So actually, that's not the situation we're living in. So we know that. So it doesn't make any sense, because then it basically means on democracy we can always argue about different things and not coming further. The other theory comes from the minimalistic. So it says we all dreamers, and democracy is only
die Bürgerschaft die
when-
herrschenden Eliten abwählen kann.
when
Also wenn es ein Feedback gibt gegenüber den Eliten, ne? Durch den
when there's
Wahlmechanismus. Das habt ihr jetzt schlecht gemacht, müsst ihr mal ein bisschen anders machen. Und da würde ich sagen, auch diese Theorie
citizenship
ist nicht mehr so richtig plausibel. Durch
can
etwas, was man
argue
vielleicht
about everything, but I
postdemokratisches
would say
nicht
that
lernen,
this theory is also not
bezeichnen
plausible,
kann, ne? Also eine Tendenz der politischen Klasse, der Eliten,
because
nicht zu lernen, aus
it's
vielen Problemlagen nicht die richtigen Schlüsse zu ziehen.
because based on lots of problems you cannot actually get a solution out of it.
Okay, werden Annahmen der Demokratietheorie widerlegt? Die Frage
So
stellt sich
are
hier. Erste Annahme ist, eigentlich nehmen alle
the
Demokratietheorien an, dass
theories
es eine Verstehbarkeit von Politik gibt. Ja, Greve nennt das Sartori-Kriterium. Sartori, italienischer Politikwissenschaftler,
Sartori is an
hat
Italian
gesagt,
political
Demokratie unterscheidet sich von
politic
allen anderen Regimen dadurch, dass
scientist
sie von normalen Menschen verstanden können
that
werden muss. Ne? Das ist in
this
anderen
theory
Regimen
should
nicht
be
so.
understood
Wir
by
können mit, Unwissenheit leben.
so it's say
Demokratie
normal
ist
people
die
or
Bürgerschaft
people who
die
are not
zentrale Größe, deshalb
scientists.
müssen die das verstehen. Jetzt ist so die Frage, ob das
So
erfüllbar ist.
the question
unter
is
den
whether
Bedingungen,
we
die
can
ich skizziert
actually
habe.
apply that.
Das zweite ist Selbstverbesserungsfähigkeit. Also können
second
Demokratien
is
sich eigentlich
this
am eigenen Schopfe quasi aus dem Sumpf ziehen, wie Münchhausen und
Self-bettering
politisch lernen.
ability or ability
Das
to
wird im Lichte
get
der
better,
jüngeren
the
Entwicklung,
self-ability
denke
to
ich,
get better.
fragwürdig. Und das letzte ist, können wir eigentlich Demokratie trotz
And
Machtungleichheiten
the last one is, can we
haben
actually
oder
make
nicht, ne? Also können
democracy,
die durch demokratische Mittel überwunden werden.
can we actually use
Und dann, das
democracy
finde ich
to
bemerkenswerter Fund, Jürgen Habermas und Chantal Mouffe, eigentlich die wichtigsten Vertreter der Demokratietheorie, sagen mittlerweile beide,
So both of them,
leben
both
in
of
einer
the
Postdemokratie.
Sartori,
Also sagen wir nicht nur,
Habermas
dass
and
ihre eigenen
Muffle
Theorien
both
auf
say
die
that we
Realität
actually are
passen.
living in a post-democracy at the moment.
Ist bemerkenswert.
So that's something to
Was sind
think
die
about.
Folgen? Eine Folge
What are the
hiervon ist, denke ich,
consequences?
das fördert undemokratische Politikansätze.
So the consequences
Ja,
are
also
that it actually
Politikansätze, die
support
demokratische Verfahren
non-democratic
aushebeln wollen, werden
political.
plausibler. Etwa Expertokratie mit der Idee, die Wissenschaft soll herrschen, weil die Wissenschaft
So the
so eine Art Stimme hat
expertocracy
und
says that
rationaler sei.
science
Das wird im Blick auf
should
Klimapolitik
dominate.
gefordert. Zweitens, der Rechtspopulismus,
Second is the right
der in Teilen
populismus.
auch ein Korrektiv sein kann. Aber wenn er zu viel Macht hat, denke ich, gefährlich ist. sieht man
So
am
whenever
Beispiel Ungarns
right
und dem dortigen
populisms have
Orban-Regime,
a lot
dass
of
die
power,
Politik
it could be very
monopolisiert.
dangerous.
Der folgt hier gewissermaßen dem Prinzip,
So the consequence
wir
is
und
the,
nur wir
the theory
sind das
that
Volk.
only us
Und
or are
sperren sozusagen alle anderen vom
the
politischen
are the
Wettbewerb aus.
people.
Dritter Punkt, auch undemokratische Alternative.
Third point,
progressiver
also
Liberalismus,
not
nenne ich das,
democratical
etwas, ungelenk, aber ich
political
denke,
is the progressive
diese
liberalismus.
Idee, zu sagen,
This
wir
idea
sind die
to
Guten,
say that we are the good
bestimmte
ones.
politische Kräfte, denke ich, tun das. Und nur wir sind die Guten.
Only
Deshalb
we
wird
are
sozusagen
the good ones.
legitimiert, gute
So it
Repressionen
legitimizes
vorzunehmen in Staat und Zivilgesellschaft.
to
Ich denke,
just
dafür gibt es auch Anzeichen.
good
wenn man etwa
repression
Meinungsfreiheit
and
betrachtet, Hate Speech
civil
Regulierung, die ambivalent ist.
society.
Ne? Aber der Punkt ist hier, dass es Akteure gibt, die gute Ziele verfolgen.
There
aber
are
dafür
people
illiberale
that search for
demokratische
good
in
goals.
Ansatz bringen. Und das wird auch plausibler, ne? Im Lichte dieser Demokratieerosion.
So that would be plausible if
Weitere
we
Frage
think about
ist,
this
wenn man das zu
democracy,
Ende denkt, was ich eingangs skizziert habe, nun Bedingungen eigentlich für Revolten
political.
vorliegen. Irgendwie habe ich immer gedacht, nee, entweder wurschtelt es jetzt so weiter, ne? Es gibt ein
I thought about either
so
I
einen evolutionären Prozess einer
look for it more
Entwicklung
or
einer
search for more answers, or there's a
Demokratischen Regime, aber es kann natürlich
process.
auch zu Revolten kommen. Und der Peter Turchin hat Interessantes dazu geschrieben.
Peter Turchin has written something very interesting about it.
Das eine nennt er Wealth Pump. Also wenn Wohlstand
about the wealth pump.
Verteilt wird in einem längeren
So
Prozess,
if richness or wealth is shared from the top, so the super rich and the class that's on top,
ja, weil das Geld nach oben.
And there's also an elite overproduction, so which means money that's on the top, or for the wealth and rich, people on the upper class.
Und zugleich gibt es mehr frustrierte Zertifizierte, ja, also es gibt mehr Leute, die gut ausgebildet sind.
And then at the same time, there's a high number of people who are frustrated certificates, so that means they actually have an academic background or a title, but they this approach can also be introduced to the elite overproduction, but they have no place on the political ambition.
So last point, what can we do? So those aren't my suggestions. Those are things that are existent. So suggestion one, we need more participation. Makes complete sense. Participatory revolution is a big essential part. We need to get everybody's voices to the table. So we need to spread that further in different types of things. So things like citizen councils is booming. There's different formats that we can think of, and that's something that we need. What's the problem here? In literature, we call this participation gap. It's mainly researched by Dalton. What does that mean? That means that educated and wealthy take part. So if we strengthen participation, that means that the participatory autocracy is basically the ones who are being given more voice that are already quite overrepresented. Second suggestion, very popular, more narration, more democratic narration. The idea here is that legitimization lives off of semantics as well, that are positive and hopeful. And I think that is correct, but it's lacking for people like me who sort of see things in a bit darker. What's the problem here for me is that, for example, Blühdorn, who's the third time that I'm quoting him here, it's simulative democracy. So this isn't real democracy. This is democracy that's being put on for show. It's a performative democracy. It's creating the feeling of democracy rather than actually being democracy. It's a little bit, honestly, also when it comes to citizen councils, because oftentimes they don't really have to say anything. They're just kind of simulations of participation. And that's actually quite annoying for those who are already disappointed by democracy. So that's quite triggering for people like that. Suggestion 3, more political education. For a long time, this has been neglected. Political studies, political socialization is something that we really need, and that has been ignored for many, many years, and we sort of need this as a upstream of constitutional protection. That's in principle that's correct, but I think that where I would kind of try to focus, I would rather not focus on education, but more on other aspects. So my biggest problem with this is that there's a tendency towards moralization in this idea. So it's this idea that if we just give them the right education, they will reach the point that we want them to reach. But it also is based upon idealization. There's a picture of democracy that's drawn that doesn't really exist any longer. Do you understand? Like, it's the problem really at the core, and as a consequence, it's quite polemic that we will reach this pupil pedagogy. So just to group this, Suggestion 4, get to the bacon, the questions of power. So we need radical reform. So we need something like the death tax the rich. So to basically outbalance the wealth pump by adding more taxes and reverse that feeling, reverse that trend. So in the US, for example, following the New Deal, there was an income tax of 90% that actually existed. Another suggestion from Buchstein is introducing things such as lottery, because lottery is actually quite fair. Everybody has the same right or opportunity to be pulled out of the draw. And we could break down hierarchies of power that way. Or by McCormack, something like a folk tribunal. So, problem with all of this is that none of it is in the agenda. I would like to conclude democracy and democracy theory are becoming more and more non-credible, so they're losing their credibility, and so far there is no proper solution that's being offered up. Thank you very, very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Veit. So I see people are standing up and going to the microphones. First question. Thank you very much for your talk. Does a place like China has a legitimation for democracy? Do you think there's more participation? Yes, I think that economic democracy, I personally find it very good. Whether it needs it to find it, I also think it's good. For the first point, it's a very difficult question. I'm not autocratic, and it's also very difficult it's difficult to give an opinion because it's quite repressive. There's not a really public discourse, so we can only imagine the legitimation problem. It's a weak point because it's an authoritarian system that's centralized. So there is always one person who is blamed for everything. So obviously the party is to blame for. So it's a bit like vulnerable compared to democracy. So here for us it's way more shared, so we don't have this autocratic point of view. Yes, thank you for the facet. My question would be to the expertocracy, saying that in the climate politics it's also supported by. I see that from one side it's a scientific discourse. There is right at the moment very popular people that open papers because saying that we have to end democracy. So it's a scientific discourse that said that expertocracy, it's nothing new. Also, like Plato, the philosopher, said that the people who are intelligent should have power because they're experts. So in the climate movement is not so clear, because it's like there's a rhetoric democracy and an euphoric democracy that people also think about. I would tend to.
Ja, dann habe ich gesehen, dass es zwei Fragen aus dem Internet gibt.
Yes, so there's two questions from the internet. Wouldn't a lot of problems be able to be solved to hand them over to a non-human identity or actor such as an AI? I mean, that question should be answered by a non-human actor, basically. Maybe that question came from an AI, who knows? Another question from the internet, and then we will ask more people in the room. The internet would like to know that everything is becoming more complex. It's not just within politics. Isn't that a general problem within society? It's really hard and difficult to stay informed, especially when it comes to complex, detailed subject matters. Yes. Yeah. Yes. The question sort of is if this complexity is something that we become aware of. That was Graves' point, is that it becomes a problem when we are aware of the fact that the complexity is becoming stronger. If we still have the Kruger effect, if we don't really have the problem, maybe. So if we're not aware of the complexities, it might still be fine. A question that might be a little bit paradoxical. In light of the fact that the state of information is not good for a lot of people and that it becomes more and more complex, does democracy need a right to ignorance? I believe we already have that. There's an anti-democratic literature that I do not belong to, but that it says and states, based on Plato, people are dumb, and democracy is the rule of the stupid masses, and this is why we have a obligation of knowing. And I would say that this this complexity problem is a structural problem within society and democracy, and it's this right to ignorance. You sort of have it already. All right, microphone 1. In the chat, we sort of had, that wasn't very nice. There were things that were being said were not so pleasant. You didn't see it. Good for you. And within the democratic system, we opted for choosing authoritarian measures by kicking people off the chat. We're really sorry. How does democratic theory, what's the stance of democratic theory on these measures taken? When people are acting up badly and are being excluded based on their behavior within a democracy, how does the political theory stand on that? Well, that really depends. I'm a big defender of the freedom of speech, but it has to have a factual core. If it's a discourse, there has to be a level of discourse to it. If it's just an insult, then I think an exclusion is absolutely functional and justifiable. It's obviously always a question of where's the line that we draw. Some people say this is an insult, other people say this is a factual statement. This in abstract, it's difficult to answer, but yeah, sorry. Microphone number 2. Oftentimes we have the problem that people don't vote within their own interest, which can be traced back to people's educational level. Shouldn't we just win back the fourth power and explain to them the world a little bit better, or make the world more explainable, and give them better explanations? And wouldn't that be the responsibility also for forums such as this one, and what could experts help in abstracting things a little bit better?
So there are 2 points there. The first one is about this being an expert and this instrumental knowledge. So if you want to know what the politics does, so an expert can help. But that's not expertography. The second is critical explanation and political education. John Dewey, that I find it very interesting. It's a democratic theoretical and philosopher. So he saw the problem of the complexity and said that we can maybe solve in 2020 that we can explain all these things with science. So people know that, so you can explain that, and people know that, so in a way that people can actually follow. But I'm not sure if this is still actual. Sorry, 1920, not 2020. Thank you. Next question, you said that as a consequence of the problem is
9/11 und der Finanzkrise und
so that after 9/11 and the financial crisis and the climate change, so that people kind of lost control of many things, so that there is a frustration there.
Yeah,
that's a very important point. It's about this, in this questionnaire is also in it that so we can control these questions. So it's very important for democracy. There is a public control promise, and that's a problem. I have to mention a point. There's research where people compare solutions between different systems, how they solve different problems in different systems. So you have to say that a democracy can be.
Aber man erlebt's nicht so.
But we don't experience that way, right?
Ja, ich sehe jetzt noch mehrere Menschen an Mikrofonen.
I see a lot of people on microphones.
Dann kommt nach hier vorne. Veit wird gleich auch hier noch Fragen beantworten.
Veit will answer questions here, but unfortunately we have to change.
Nach vorne kommt, würde ich sagen, dass der gesamte Saal für Veit erstmal einen dicken
So if you want a question, come to the front. Otherwise, a roll of applause for Veit.